So a few months ago, we did a video, top 5 drop shot mistakes. And a lot of you guys saw it. It created a lot of controversy. A lot of you guys enjoyed it. Some people didn't like that I talked smack about their favorite hooks.
Yeah,
but
I didn't like it.
well, it needed to happen. Anyhow, what we never really did was we never really came back to you guys with an actual drop shot tutorial. And a lot of you guys asked for it. Just a full drop shot breakdown, everything we do, the hooks, the weights, how we set our leader, the baits, the rod, the reel. So today, we are going to revisit the drop shot. We are going to 100% break down the whole thing for you so you can see exactly what we're doing. So if you're ready to get your drop shot game on, let's do it. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Depths, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com. All right, what's up my friends? I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, the Tackle Otaku. I'm here with my buddy Jeffrey the King. We're the Hookup Tackle USA. Today we are talking about the drop shot. You stoked, Jeff?
Yeah, it's my favorite technique.
No, it's not. Have you ever thrown a drop shot?
I threw one maybe like 5 years ago.
That's what I thought.
I caught one on it.
Back when
though.
you used to catch fish?
Yeah, I caught one on it. First cast.
Drop shot's the deal when you actually want to catch them.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Right. So, drop shot is a technique that has been out, basically probably now for like 30 years. Right? So we've been throwing it out here on the West Coast basically since the late 90s, and it was popular in Japan years before that. So this is a technique that's been out for a very long time. We've thrown it. I spent my whole life basically throwing the drop shot, but it's still one of those techniques that's not very well understood. A lot of guys are just getting into it, but it's one of those techniques that really is probably always going to be here to stay. So it's really important that it's a technique that we all understand well, from the hooks to the weights to the whole rigging. It's something that you'll be able to utilize in your arsenal basically forever. So in case you are new to fishing and you're not sure what a drop shot is, this is basically what we're talking about. So basically the weight is dropped below the bait so that the weight is on the bottom and the bait is above the weight. Okay, and we can do all kinds of different hooks, all kinds of different baits, and I will show you some in the tank so you can see the different actions. But this is a drop shot. And typically, we think of the drop shot and we think of it as a finesse technique, right? Light line, spinning rod. And generally, the drop shot is a great way just to get bites. A lot of people think of the drop shot as like a limit filler, right? They get 1 or 2 big bites, and like, okay, I just got to go fill my limit. I'm going to go throw a drop shot around and go, catch 3 or 4 little ones, right? So it's regarded as a technique for just getting a lot of bites, but smaller fish. But honestly, this is something, some of my biggest fish have come on a drop shot. I've utilized the drop shot in a lot of different ways. I know a lot of you guys fish areas like the California Delta or back east where you guys have a lot of, toolies and weeds and that kind of stuff. You guys can power shot. So you can do bait casting rods, thicker line, bigger baits. I've even used the drop shot down in Mexico when the bite gets really tough and they just won't eat normal stuff. The reason why the drop shot is so effective is because it allows you to move the bait off of the bottom into the fish's territory, right? So sometimes you'll get a bait that floats and it will stay high off the bottom. Sometimes the bait will sink down, but then as you move it, it will lift up off the bottom, right? So essentially what's happening with most techniques, right? If I was to throw a jig, if I was to throw a Texas rig, Ned rig, pick your poison, right? The bait lands on the bottom and basically drags on the bottom the whole time, right? Well, if your bait is on the bottom it's very easy for a fish to stare at it, and then when the bait moves, just kind of move out of the way, and as it moves again, just kind of move out of the way, and just keep shifting its body if it's not really sure about it, right? Obviously, if it looks real and the fish is hungry, it's going to eat it. But when the fish are in that kind of, mode where they're not super aggressive, they're more neutral, very easy for a fish to move out of the way of traditional baits that are on the bottom. When you put a drop shot out there, right, and you have the ability for the bait to be in the bottom, and all of a sudden you kind of just shake your tip and that worm kind of lifts up, what happens is the fish is looking at it, fish is staring, and all of a sudden that worm kind of moves up and now is right face to face with it. And remember, fish don't have hands, so they can't like pick it up and look at it and be like, it's a worm, right? So they use their mouth as their hands. When they're not sure about something, they suck it in, try to figure out what it is, spit it back out if they're not happy with it. Now, one thing that you guys that get a chance to bed fish a lot know, anytime a bait bumps a bass in the lower jaw, instinctively it eats it, right? It's kind of the same thing where if you're just sitting there with your hand open, not paying attention, and somebody puts something in your hand, you close it, right? It's the same thing with a bass. So by the bass kind of inspecting your bait, and all of a sudden the bait kind of lifts up and is right in its face, instinctively a lot of times it eats it just because it's just how it's wired. And that's why the drop shot gets so many bites. You're drawing instincts out of fish that really didn't want to bite, and you're giving the chance to present something just off the bottom in a more of a lifelike fashion for the fish that are aggressive, okay? So that's basically the reason why to drop shot, right? We're just presenting it in a different way. Now, let's talk about what we actually need to do it well and to do it properly. All right, so let's start with the terminal gear we need. Obviously, we need some hooks and we need some weights, right? So let's start with the hook, since that's the first thing we're gonna be tying on this rig. Now, this is where we did some shit talking before, Jeff. Jeff's already smiling because he knows what's about to happen. Okay, chances are, if you guys got into drop shotting before hanging out with us or a really good pro shop that could point you down to the right path, you guys probably started using the wrong hook. And if you guys are using a hook like this, or this hook specifically, stop, okay? We're gonna change this up for you. Now, just because the hook says split shot, drop shot on it does not mean it's right, okay? So Gamagatsu has made drop shot an unfortunate thing for a lot of guys. So a lot of guys just get this hook and they lose so many fish that they give up on it, okay? So we're gonna stop using these style hooks. We are going to switch to using the correct hooks, okay? So basically 2 different style hooks that we're gonna use. One is for nose hooking and one is for weedless presentations, or I just call it Texas rig drop shotting, but it's basically a weedless and then a nose hook. Okay, so let's start with nose hook. Now, the reason we're going to nose hook a bait instead of make it weedless or Texas rig it is when we want the worm to have, maximum movement, we're gonna nose hook it. When we're not fishing around anything that's super snaggy, it's more open water, it's flats, it's sand, it's things that maybe we're dragging, and we don't have to worry about losing a lot of stuff, I want to nose hook it, okay? When we're going to be fishing through brush, through weeds, through grass, through things that are going to be real snaggy, then I'm going to want to go to a weedless presentation, okay? It's going to bury into the worm, it's going to take a little bit of the life out of the bait, not much, right? But it's going to allow us to fish it through a lot of cover and brush and that kind of stuff, okay? So, nose hooks. These are the 2 that you need to add into your arsenal, okay? These are the best nose hooks in the world. This is the Decoy Shot Rig Worm 10. We've talked about it a gazillion times before. This is the Owner Mosquito Light. They are almost the identical hook, okay? Now, I'm not here to tell you what's right or wrong, except this is right and this is wrong. Maybe I am here to tell you that, right? Okay, let me break this down really quick, just in case you guys didn't see the last video. I just want to make sure that we're very, very, very clear. And this is important too, because you know, there are new hooks that always come out on the market. And just because they say, you know, drop shot on them doesn't mean they're right. I want you guys to understand what it is that you're looking for, okay? So this is the Gamagatsu split shot drop shot hook, okay? The reason why this hook is no good is you'll notice the point of the hook and the eye of the hook are basically in the same plane, okay? So when it sets the hook, there's just not a lot of gap here for the fish to get hooked. So what ends up happening is you end up skin hooking them like this. So this hook is notorious for getting bit. You are on them and you're fighting them, and then they jump and then your shit goes flying like, ah, man, I just didn't get a good hook in them. Well, you're right. You got a bad hook in them, right? That's what happens. Now, a lot of you guys are going to argue this, that you have amazing success with this hook. And if that's the case, great. Just keep throwing it. But my guess is that 99.9% of the people that are watching this, that have been throwing this, have been struggling with landing fish. Okay? And that's what we're here to change. By switching to one of these guys, you're going to change the bend of the hook in your favor. Okay? So now the hook point and the gap, now you've got this huge gap, right? So that when it swings, it's got plenty of hook point to go in and all the way through the barb, and this hook will hook them in that hard part of the jaw every single time. Okay, so you're gonna land way more fish using the right hook. Now, if you're just huge Gamagatsu fans, use the G-Finesse version. Okay, the G-Finesse version is way better than that blue package version. Okay, that hook would be fine. Okay, but somewhere in here, a size 1 to a size 4 is generally where we live. Size 1 for like 6-inch baits, size 2 for 4-inch baits, size 3 or maybe even 4 for like tiny little, 2 or 3-inch baits. That's general rule of thumb. Important to note, when you are using a nose hook and you get a bite, you don't need to swing hard when you have the right hook. Okay, so if you're moving it up and all of a sudden, boom, you get the bite, all you're doing is you're just kind of winding down and lifting. You're just putting pressure on it. You're not winding down and cracking the whip, right? Those little small hooks are designed to penetrate very easily. So all you need to do is just lift and put pressure and wind, and you'll have them. All right. If you guys want to go weedless, let's say you're fishing around some brush, trees, you want to get it down in some brush piles or something like that, and you want to crawl the worm up and through the limbs, then you're going to want to go with a weedless presentation. These are the two hooks that I recommend very strongly. This is the Owner Cover Shot hook, and this one is the Roboworm Rebarb. Now, the Rebarb is a Gamagatsu straight shank hook that Roboworm has put a little bait keeper on. Both hooks are amazing. Okay, we've been using this one for decades. This one is newer, and a lot of us are switching to this just because the guard is more of a fluorocarbon guard, but they're both amazing. Okay, I go back and forth here. If I have to choose this or this, I don't really care. And it's the same with these two. If I got to choose shot rig or mosquito light, I don't really care. They're basically the same thing. But what's important to note here on the weedless hook is that it's very important when you're drop shotting to use a straight shank hook. Okay, this will help your hookup ratio exponentially by using a straight shank versus like a offset shank or a wide gap style hook. And the reason for that is, remember, if we're using this style hook, it's because we're coming through brush, right? So we want to kind of crawl it up and through and over limbs and that kind of stuff. If you use this style hook, right? So this would be like a Gamagatsu EWG style hook. If you're using this style hook, the worm's sitting here, and as you're pulling it up and over brush, and that worm is kind of, hitting the brush, the worm is going to kind of go down this, and you're going to get like a ball of worm. It's not going to maintain its beautiful straight shape. Okay, it's going to kind of come down the hook. It's going to be all kind of bunched up. It's going to spin around in circles as you're winding. Your line's going to get twisted. It sucks, right? By going to a straight shank, using the right one, this little keeper here will keep the worm in place so you can move it through brush, up and through stuff, and it will stay straight, it will wind in straight, and you won't have any of the nightmares. Same thing with sizing. I generally go size 1 for my smaller worms, size 1/0 for my 6-inch type stuff. If you guys go to a bigger worm, like a 7, 8, 9 inch, then you can go up to a 2/0 or a 3/0 hook. That's great, especially some of you guys that are power shotting some of the bigger, thicker plastics. They make these in all kinds of sizes to fit. All right, let's talk about weights. So, no right or wrong when it comes to, you know, what style weight or, you know, how heavy of the weight. It all depends on what it is that you need out of your weight. Now, typically, weights will come in one of these two fashions, okay? Either like a little clip-on weight or a round eye weight that you tie on, okay? These are generally the two types that you will see. And they'll come in different shapes. Some are round, some are teardrop, some are cylinder. And there's a case to be made about having the different styled weights. For me, most of my drop shot fishing is done casting and dragging it back, right? So for me, I want the weight that is going to be most efficient for coming through snags and not snagging all the time. So I'm generally going with more of a cylinder style weight because I find that these just kind of come through rock and cover the best. If all I'm doing is kind of video game fishing, and I see, oh, there's a fish right there on the graph, I'm just kind of opening the bail and dropping it straight down, that's when I'll go to more of like a round or a teardrop shape, just because they're a little more condensed and they'll just sink faster. They won't have quite as much, you know, resistance against this longer weight going down in the water, okay? But just to not overly complicate it, I generally stay in this cylinder style. So here's your clip-on, here's your tie-on. And the difference is the clip-on is designed for you just to put the line through and clip it on. Okay, pretty simple. If you snag the weight, you can pull and the line will kind of come out and the weight will stay, but you'll still keep your hook and your bait and you just put a new weight on there. The tie-on kind, you're gonna actually tie this on so that if you snag it in a rock, it's going to hopefully pull out when you put enough pressure. The downside could potentially be that you may break your whole rig or your whole leader if you snag. But if you're using heavier leader line, or you know, if you're snagging a lot and you have confidence that you know you can pull it out, then it's nice to go to the tie-on kind, just so you're not losing so many weights. Now, keep in mind, the clip-on kind, you can also tie them on. So what I usually do is I go in with the line, I clip it. I usually go back in one more time and clip it so it's kind of double clipped. So I really got to put a lot of pressure on it for two lines to kind of pull out, but you can certainly tie that on as well. As far as weight goes, usually 3/16, quarter, or 3/8. Those are the main three sizes. So for everyday drop shot fishing, it's usually either a 3/16 or a quarter, right? One of these two. I'm more of a quarter guy. A lot of guys are more of a 3/16 guy. It just depends on your rod and what you feel and how the contact is to you. But one of these two sizes is going to be your starting point. So if you're just starting, I'd say try quarter. And if it just feels too heavy and too soggy, then go to 3/16, okay? Now, I will jump to a 3/8 when I'm either fishing really deep, or if it's windy and I need some added sensitivity, I'll go to a 3/8. A lot of you guys are fishing really heavy current where you need to, you know, the heavier weight to get down, so you may even have to go to a 1/2 ounce or 5/8 or maybe even a 3/4 to get it down. Some of you guys are fishing big Great Lake water, right, where you get big swells and you know it's really hard to maintain contact. You may have to go, you know, to a 1 ounce or heavier even as well. But for probably 99% of the time, 1/4 ounce, 3/16, 3/8, that's going to get everything accomplished for you. Okay, let's talk really quick about leader length. Also, really quick, before I jump into that, a lot of questions that I get are, what the hell do I do with a drop shot? It's such a pain in the ass to store, right? Because we're so used to taking the hook and attaching it up here to the guide, and then you just have this weight like clanking around. This is how I've stored my drop shot for ever, right? And this is just a really easy way without needing any kind of special hook keeper or anything. I just attach the weight right here in the bail to the reel. I tighten it down, I wrap it around the rods. This thing can bounce around and do whatever, and it'll stay put. And then when I'm ready to use it, I just unattach it there, I just unwrap it, and I am ready to go and ready to make my casts. All right, let's talk leader length for a minute. How much line do we need between our weight and our bait, right? Well, we have to start somewhere, right? So generally speaking for me, I'm generally about 10 inches, okay? 10 to 12 inches is a good all-around starting point from hook to weight. And for me, the reason that is because that allows me to basically, if this is the ground, allows my bait to kind of get down to the bottom, and then I can kind of just shake it up, you know, 7, 8 inches, fall back down. So I feel like if there's a fish looking at it and they're kind of nose down, it's enough length to get it into kind of the fish's face without it being too far to where it's going over the fish's head, right? I just am always kind of visualizing that the bass is staring at my shit, right? So I want to try to keep it right in the fish's zone, not pull it over his head and have him go, oh, that's stupid, right? So generally speaking, I would say 99 out of 100 times, this is probably the right length, somewhere in that 10 to 12 inches. Now, if you're jacking fish and they're coughing up craws and there's just craw pieces everywhere, their mouths are really smooth from eating craws and shells and rocks and that kind of stuff, you can certainly shorten the length, right? So sometimes I might even go down to like a 3 or 4 inch drop, and that way my bait is constantly just really right on the bottom, right where a crawdad would be, and it's just maintaining that bottom contact versus coming off of it. If they're feeding on shad, and let's say you're looking at the graph and you're seeing fish are suspended 2 or 3 feet off the bottom and there's schools of shad, well, by all means, let's lengthen the leader, you know, 2 or 3 feet and keep that bait, you know, up where the fish are at, right? So there's no right or wrong. You can do all kinds of different things with it, but day in and day out, this kind of 10 to 12 inch length is perfect for almost all situations. All right, let's talk about line really quick. So for me with a drop shot, I'm almost always doing some kind of braid to leader connection. This is where I live, either in Samurai Braid, JBraid, or Seaguar Smackdown. I love these 3 braids. Any of these would be good options for you. What I'm looking for is I'm looking for a very soft line that just casts really easy. I'm generally staying in a 10 to 20 pound, just depending on how far I need to cast. 15 pound is the most universal for me. If I need it to be even lighter, I'll go down to 10. If I want it to be a little bit stronger, maybe a little bit thicker leader line, then I'll bump up to 20. If I'm making really long casts, I do like the high vis, so sometimes I'll go to a chartreuse or, you know, a gray that ends up being a little more white, just so I can see it out there. If I'm not making a super long cast, or if the water is just crystal clear, then sometimes I'll stay in just a traditional dark green, just Samurai Braid. But any of these would be great options for you. I strongly recommend them. I've been using them for years, and they're great on your spinning gear. The reason why I like to go braid to leader versus straight fluoro is that braid is just such a smaller diameter that you just get such better cast control. It's also going to give you a little bit more sensitivity because it's going to transmit vibration quicker, so you're going to feel things faster, but really it's just about castability. One challenge to a drop shot is that it has a tendency to spin and coil, right? So a lot of times we make the cast and we fish our, you know, piece, and then we're kind of out of the zone we wanted to fish, and we wind it back in really fast. Well, no matter how straight your worm and your knot is on your rig, when you wind it in fast, that thing is spinning in back to you, and every time it spins, it's twisting your line. So by going with straight fluoro, it's thicker diameter, but it also has a tendency to really become a nightmare with twists and coils. By going to braid, it's going to reduce a lot of that for you. Now, when I go to leader, I pretty much live in some kind of leader material. I've been throwing the Sunline FC Leader, love it. The reason I go with a leader material over just like a normal spool of line is leader material is going to be made a little bit stiffer. It's going to have more abrasion resistance, better knot strength. It's too stiff to spool a full reel, but it's perfect for using, 8, 10, 12 feet at a time. And generally for me, as far as distance of leader, I generally pull a full body length out and then maybe like another half length. So I'm generally somewhere from 8 to 12 foot of leader. I like my knot to be just above my reel versus in the reel. I'm just looking to create a little bit of a cushion between my braid and my worm. I don't need it to be 30 foot long or any crazy nonsense like that. I just need a little bit of space just so that the visibility goes down and the bait looks as lifelike as it can. I generally live somewhere in the 5, 6, 7, 8 pound, right? When I'm on my spinning. If I'm going to be power shotting or something like that, then I'll bump up to 12, 14, 16, whatever it is I need to go to. But if you guys live somewhere in this 6, 7, 8 pound range, you're going to be great. Now remember, every step down is going to be a huge difference in diameter. So the difference between 8 and 6 or even 8 and 7 is 10% basically on each step down. So when you go from 8 to 6, it's like a 20% diameter difference. That means you're gonna get 20% more life out of your bait with the lighter line. So if you're having trouble getting bit throwing the 8 pound, drop down in size and you'll see that your bait's gonna get more movement and the fish are gonna respond to that. Of course, you gotta have to balance it out, right? You don't wanna go down to 4 pound or 5 pound and you got a big fish and heavy cover, you're just gonna break them all off. So you gotta use some common sense, right? I always try to get away with the heaviest line possible, just to give myself as much cushion in case I screw up, right? But if I'm throwing 8 and 8's usually my starting point and they're just not biting and I think they should, I'll drop down to 7 or 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever it is I need to get more life out of the worm and to get more bites. Now, if you guys just don't want to mess with the knot, you don't want to mess with the braid, and you want to go straight fluoro, do it, okay? You're going to lose a little bit of casting distance. It's going to be a little bit more of a maintenance nightmare, maybe, but for years and years and years, we did this, and there's nothing wrong with doing it if it's working for you. This is where I would recommend living. This is where I live if I'm going to go straight fluoro. 7 pound is basically my starting point. I like 7 pound because it's going to be strong like 8, but cast like 6. Okay, so castability is super, super critical with a drop shot. You want to be able to throw it out there. So 7 pound is a great place to go. And if I'm just not getting the bites, then I drop down usually to 5 pound or sometimes even to 4 if I really need to get some extra bites. But if you had 5 and 7, you could basically cover probably 99% of your drop shot needs. All right, when it comes to rods, I'm basically looking for sensitivity first and foremost. I want to feel everything that's happening down there. Because a lot of times, when your bait's just up here and it's just kind of moving around, the fish they just suck it in, right? Or if it kind of hits them here in the face, they're just going to suck it in. It's not like they're going to, boom, just jerk it in your eyes, right? So most of the time with a bite, it's just kind of a pressure bite. Or it's a very light, like, tick. So, going with a really highly sensitive rod is pretty critical if you're really going to try to elevate your drop shot game as high as you can. So, historically, I've been a huge fan of Loomis NRX rods. 852 JWR has been my go-to, and I'll drop down to the 822 DSR for nose hook. Challenge right now, they're really impossible to find. Loomis is kind of in a transition, getting ready to roll a new line of rods out. So I have switched over to the Megabass Destroyer P5s, and this has kind of been my 1-2 punch. So the baby plugging is the no-brainer rod for me for the lighter line and the nose hook. Okay, so if I'm throwing 3/16 quarter ounce stuff, lighter line, and I'm nose hooking, the rod has a really nice soft tip to it, so it will absorb any impact that I put. It's not going to bust them off, but this is just a great highly sensitive rod that I could get that thunk way out there and then just apply pressure and the rod's going to load and notch it up. For my Texas rigging approach, a little heavier line, maybe a little bit bigger bait, then I switch over to the Destroyer P5 Wind Buster. Okay, I talk about this rod a lot. It's an incredibly versatile rod. It does a lot of things amazingly well. It's a much stronger rod, so this is going to be more of my 1/4, 3/8, ½ ounce weight. My bigger worms, my 6-inch, 7-inch, or my little bit thicker, bulkier stuff, or when I just need more power. Incredibly sensitive, It's got, again, that kind of fast tip. It still has, you know, a soft enough tip to absorb a little bit, but it's really beautiful for that weedless presentation, you know, that kind of Texas rig style drop shot. It's got lots of power to drive the hook in, pull fish out of a tree. So that's really my 1-2 punch. As far as reels go, you know, I'm more of a Daiwa spinning fan, but it doesn't matter. You know, if you're a Shimano fan, Daiwa fan, it doesn't make a difference, right? One thing I would recommend is go with the biggest reel that feels right on the rod. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of 3,000 size reels. A lot of guys like 4,000 even. The bigger the spool, the smoother the drag when the fish are pulling, and the more line pickup you're going to get. So, you know, when I've got a big one close and it surges, I want that startup inertia for that to come off to be as smooth as possible, right? So the bigger spool just gives me more space for that spool to be a little bit butterier than the tighter, smaller spool. It's also going to help with line management. It's just way easier to manage line on a wider spool than on a super narrow spool, especially if you guys are throwing straight fluoro. All right, if you're throwing straight fluoro, you have to go 3,000 or 4,000, or it is going to be a coil nightmare for you. Okay, so whatever you prefer, just go with the biggest reel you can get away with that feels proper on the rod. All right, let's talk about maybe the most important piece, and that's what the fuck do we put on the hook, right? Let's talk about the baits for a second. And this is where drop shotting can get really fun, because you can drop shot anything, right? There's no rhyme or reason to, you know, or no rules to what you can or can't do. If you got an idea, do it, try it, see what happens, right? So I'm gonna break down the baits that we use a lot just to try to simplify the process for you guys so you have some starting points. But by all means, get out there and play and try some different stuff. So out here on the West Coast, if you drop shot, you're basically born with a Robo Worm, okay? So everybody out here has boxes of Robo Worms. This is the standard drop shot bait for everybody out here. Robo Worms come in, you know, different sizes. There's a 4.5, there's a 6, there's a straight tail, there's a curly tail, there's a fat if you want a little thicker, right? So there's a lot of different options. But the biggest thing Robo Worm does is they make great pours. Their colors are very true to color. They're very consistent from one run to the next. They're highly salted, so it's a lot like throwing, you know, like a Yamamoto type bait where when they get it, they really just hold on to it and they don't really let it go, which is great for those times when you're not feeling it. It's like, yeah, it feels weird, right? And you know, they're swimming around, you really don't know, and you're like, man, is that a fish? And then you're like, and then they just start pulling, you're like, oh, it is a fish. Well, they held on to it the whole time, right? So Robo Worm is a great place to start. There are like 5 million colors, okay? So there are times when a certain color will really catch fire in certain places. So, you know, you guys may live on a certain body of water where they want something that has blue in it, or they want something that has red flake in it, or it has to have a chartreuse tail, or whatever the case may be, right? And so there's colors to match everything. If you're just starting out, I keep this really simple. I want a couple shads and a couple crawdad colors, okay? So for me, in the shads, it's always a Morning Dawn. So Morning Dawn is my shad color. Now, I know what you're thinking, it's pink. But remember, as baits fall in the water, the first colors to disappear are red and pink. So by the time this gets down to them, it's actually pretty clear. It's kind of just a clearish gray type color. So it's very natural, very shaddy, right? So usually just like some kind of Morning Dawn, and then maybe a Morning Dawn with a chartreuse tail. In case they're feeding on, you know, bluegill or threadfin or something, sometimes that little chartreuse tail is just a little trigger point for them. So this is my shad. For my craws, I generally am going with something more in like a green pumpkin color. Okay, so green pumpkin purple or desert craw, and again, sometimes I'll add just a little color. So desert craw is a little orange on the back. Just looks like, you know, sometimes the pinchers get a little different color. Pretty straightforward, right? I don't need every color green pumpkin or every color green that they make. I just need a couple that I have confidence in. These two colors, pretty much everywhere I go, work. Now, other colors that I add based on seasonality as we get into summer and the water gets really clear and it gets really hot, that's when I find the transparent kind of brighter colors work really well. And this is where I'll add my reds and purples, okay? So red crawler and margarita mutilator, this is basically the time of the year for that, okay? So important staples in the summertime for me. And again, no rhyme or reason. So if it's wintertime and they're eating purple, then throw margarita mutilator. It's basically just a brown and purple worm. Or maybe it's spring and they want red, throw a red crawler, okay? But for me, day in and day out, these are great summertime colors. In the winter, when we get a lot more shadows, right? The sun is lower on the horizon, there's a lot darker water, a lot more shadows in the water. I typically like to throw a more solid color, a more cinnamon type base color versus like a clear green pumpkin color. So that's when I will go to like an oxblood type color, people's worm. These are the colors that I use in that darker water. They're great first thing in the morning, right? Before the sun comes up. They're great when there's lots of shadows. So that's kind of my color breakdown with the Roboworm. Now, some other worm style baits that you guys should definitely pay attention to. Reins makes a worm called the Bubblin' Shaker. This is basically a ribbed kind of a zipper worm, but it's made out of more of a floating plastic. So where the Roboworm is going to have a nice kind of neutral buoyant, and then on the paws, if you give it slack, it's going to slowly go down to the bottom, which sometimes I want, right? So that when I lift it back up, that worm kind of moves up into the fish's face. Sometimes I want the bait to just stay, right? And just kind of quiver up there and not sink to the bottom. And when I want that, I can go to the Reins Bubblin' Shaker. It's going to float, it's going to have a little bit more buoyancy to it. It'll stay up a little bit higher. That's a great one to add. Sometimes I just need a little bit of mix to the variety, right? I need a little different flavor, different scent, a different look. Any of the crawler style baits make great drop shot baits as well. I like the OSP Dolive Crawler more than some of the other ones just because it has a little thicker head. It tends to kind of stay on the hook a little bit better. It's got a ton of versatility to it, a bunch of different type colors. So this is another great one to mix in. You know, when the drop shot bite's going, but they've seen a lot of the same bait, a lot of times they can go behind with a crawler style bait and just get a few more bites. Another one that I throw a ton, especially for smallmouth, they just destroy this thing, it's like smallmouth crack, is the OSP Dolive Stick, okay? Now, I'll throw this in the 3-inch primarily. Sometimes I'll go to the 3.5-inch size, just depending on what size I need. But the Dolive Stick is just an amazing little drop shot bait on the nose hook because it just has this little quiver on the back of it, so I can shake it and just real naturally just kind of quiver. So it looks like a little bait fish, a little goby, a little crawdad. It can look like basically anything depending on the coloration that you guys choose. But an absolutely deadly nose hook little worm from OSP. And then another great one that's relatively new to the market is from Valley Hill, and this is the Jacobee. So they have a Jacobee and then they have a kids Jacobee, which basically just means a little bit smaller. And again, it's just got a different type tail to it. So it's just gonna have a different motion to it. So you can see it's got that kind of bait fish type tail. It's just gonna look different in the water. It's gonna have a different movement. So again, when the fish are highly pressured and they've seen a lot of the same thing, like out here, when the drop shot bite's going, if there's a 100-boat tournament, there's 100 boats throwing a drop shot, right? And there's probably 100 boats throwing a Roboworm. So sometimes, even though the Roboworm, when they're just smoking the drop shot, it's still a Roboworm. But when they get tough or like they're not quite right, that's when I'll mix in some of these other baits and just destroy them. Okay, now the other style bait that I'll throw a lot on the drop shot is a minnow style bait, okay? And a couple to point out to you guys. One of my favorites is another OSP bait. This is the OSP Mylar Minnow. Now, this is probably the most realistic, lifelike, true minnow imitation out there. So if the fish are feeding on little fry, little baby bass, you know, any small little forage, the Mylar Minnow is unbelievable. You can just kind of shake it real lightly and it's just going to kind of rotate and quiver through. The body's got this nice buoyant floating kind of plastic where it just looks so lifelike under the water. So this is a no-brainer option for you. Another one that is slept on a lot, but this has been one of my favorites for a long time. So about a decade ago, Optimum Baits and Lucky Craft actually got together and collabed to make a drop shot bait, right? And it was kind of Lucky Craft's first stab in the soft plastic market, and it was called the Victory Tail, okay? Now, Optimum is still hand pouring these guys. It's the same action, it's the same everything that the Lucky Craft package was. It's available in a couple different sizes, and basically it's just giving you just another kind of minnow shaped bait, but it's that nice soft hand pour, so you're gonna get a lot of life out of it, a lot of action out of it, and just a really great finesse approach. And again, something different when the fish are really keyed in on that bait fish. And then finally for me, a technique that has really been hot the last few years is what's referred to as drop swimming, right? And this is the bait that basically put that on the map. This is the Megabass Hazardong Shad. So it's a small 3-inch, they make a 4-inch version as well, but the 3-inch is really the key version here. Small paddle tail swim bait. You're gonna use it on the nose hook. You can certainly just shake it like you would a worm, but really what's designed is to throw out and then just kind of drag it along the bottom, and that bait is just going to swim just off the bottom, however long your leader length is, right? Your weight will drag and the bait will just kind of be swimming as the weight is dragging. Just a super effective way when they're super keyed in on bait fish. Again, if you live around a smallmouth, you should have hundreds of these things in your boat, because you will be catching pretty much every fish that stares at it. So if you need something just a little quicker moving versus just kind of staying in place and picking things apart, look for the Hazardong Shad. All right, guys, that is a wrap. That is everything in our arsenal. That's how we do it, from the hooks to the weights to the baits. There it is. There's everything. Now, I am super excited for you guys to get this stuff on the water and to leave some feedback on baits and styles of things that you guys are finding are working as well, because the most important thing is that the community as a whole, we're catching fish and we're having a good time. So if you've got some other baits or some tricks up your sleeve that you want to share, definitely share it below down in the comments, because we'd all love to hear from you. If you have questions, certainly ask me a question in the comments. Jeff will leave links to all the products in the description, so if you want to check them out, you can. So until next time, on behalf of myself, my family, and Jeff and Carmen, everybody around here, thank you guys for the business. Thank you for watching. Go out there, catch some drop shot fish, enjoy. Remember, you're gonna catch some giants if you fish it correctly. So go out there and do it. You wanna go drop shot fishing, Jeff?
Absolutely.
You'd actually catch a fish,
My
though.
favorite technique.
All right. Well, guys, until next time, peace out. I'm gonna go smoke your ass on a drop shot, dude.